Hi, I'm David Levine. I'm chairman of Science Writers in New York. My guest tonight is Roxanne Khamsi, who is an author, speaker, and contributing writer for The Atlantic. Her writing has appeared in publications such as The New York Times, The Economist, Popular Science, The Atlantic, Scientific American, Slate, Nature, New York Magazine, Wired Magazine, and National Geographic. And we're here to discuss her new book, which is this book, which is really good. And so, Roxanne, why'd you write this book? This is your first book, right?
It is my first book. Hopefully not my
Okay.
last one, although after the last few years, it's like imagining doing it again is pretty daunting. Um, but you know me and I've known you for a while, so I've been reporting on genetics for a long time, 20 years, plus some change. And I I've been writing about inherited disease. I've been writing about inherited predispositions to disease, so everything from um, rare Mendelian disorders to like predispositions to breast cancer or things like that. And then in 2018, I was at Nature Medicine. I was an editor there. And I came across a paper that had been published a few years before in the New England Journal of Medicine. So these are both like research journals. And that study explained how people who had mutant blood cells in their system had a higher risk of heart attack and stroke and things like that. And so from that point forward, I was like, wait a second, like I thought we only have cancer as a result of the spontaneous mutations that accumulate in us. The idea that something common like heart disease could be caused by acquired mutations was completely wild to me. And I decided, okay, I have to figure out, is this just one thing or am I missing this whole picture of how we pick up mutations and they change our health? So I looked around and I found indeed we acquire mutations throughout the course of our life, and it affects basically our risk of every sort of disease. And then I decided, okay, well, I have to write a book about this because this kind of challenges everything I thought I understood about genetics. So that's why I wrote the book.
Okay. And I was surprised, starting the book and there are characters like Charles Darwin. And why is Darwin in the book? Because I was thinking of
Darwin's everywhere. Darwin's in my bookshelf. He's all over my bookshelf, you know.
I
So
was thinking of modern. This is the new findings and modern, and
right.
like it's just Charles Darwin knew about it.
Yeah, so one of the things that really startled me was that I'm really prone, I think maybe you're the same way. I'm prone to like kind of following the kind of like Hansel and Gretel trail, like the breadcrumb trail. Like you read one paper, let's say from the past few years, and then you kind of see what it references, and then you see what it references, and you kind of just keep going back further in time, kind of like a Bill and Ted, excellent adventure uh, journey through the time portal or whatever. And ultimately, I found that I got taken back repeatedly to the late 1800s, specifically to a guy named Wilhelm Roux. And he was this son of a fencing dynasty. So, like his father and his father's father and his father's father were all fencing masters, and they wanted him also to be a fencing master, but he decided to take his own path and pursue science, partly because the book that his father had sent to the university to kind of persuade them to put him in the fencing program got mistaken for a library donation. So, like that altered the course of Wilhelm Roux's life. And Roux decided that he would look at the human body, and he was a big fan of Darwin's because Darwin's book had just come out a couple of years before, and or one of Darwin's books, first book, on the origin of species, and he was like, wait a second. This Roux guy was like, wait a second. I think the cells in the body compete against one another just like species do. And Darwin actually got a copy of this book, but he didn't understand German that well, so he kind of sent it to a friend to review for Nature. But again, it kind of shows you how long these ideas have kind of been percolating, that our bodies are these kind of landscapes of of competition. It has only been in the last decade or so that we've had the tools to actually show that that competition kind of plays out at the genetic level and that we are this just landscape of genetic diversity.
So he's been kind of overlooked in the history of science a bit.
Oh, Wilhelm
And
Roux? Wilhelm Roux?
yes,
Yes,
yeah.
like I devote a whole chapter to him and his whole like fencing story, how he escaped that fate and things like that. Partly because nobody had paid attention to this aspect of his science. He's well known in some respects for being a good embryologist, so kind of understanding
Mhm.
how embryos develop and things like that. But when I started writing this book a few years ago, his book, the one that Darwin read, the one that in which Drew had kind of proposed this Darwinian competition between cells in the body, it's called Der Kampf der Teil in Organismus, which is like the German. I was
Mhm.
trying to understand the text in German because it had not yet been translated into English. But just a short while before my book was finalized, there was somebody at Harvard who worked with somebody to translate the book for the first time ever. So, like more than 140 years later. Um, which kind of also hints at the fact that other people are finding this important. Scientists are finding it important to dig into this history, how we're just all rediscovering that maybe this idea that the body is a landscape of evolution isn't as novel as we thought, but it's now being demonstrated with hard evidence. Because of course, Darwin and Roux, they didn't know about DNA. That was long time before that was discovered.
Yeah. So, basically there's a view that our cells were kind of fixed
Yeah.
and not changing. And you kind of turned that on its head and you talked about some of the breakthroughs in autocorrection you talk about, and you talk about um, inheriting damaged mutations have self-corrected. And these are all concepts that, you talk about, bubble babies and stuff, but these are all concepts that I really didn't know much about. So I was
Yeah.
wondering if you might talk about it a little bit.
I mean, like how part of the thing, I mean, maybe part of the reason I wanted to write this book is like even businesses these days say, oh, it's in our DNA, like everyone's like, oh, it's in
Right.
my DNA. Like that's something stable and fixed. And it kind of annoys me a bit sometimes when that phrase, it's in our DNA, is taken and used in corporate context where it has nothing to do with genetics.
Yeah.
So I wanted to challenge the idea that our DNA is the same in all our cells because it's not. We are a single cell in the first 24 hours after we're conceived, after the sperm and egg that make us join. And after that 24 hours, we're two cells. And then after that, we're four cells, and then eight. And then by day five, we're more than 100 cells with like a hollow center. But every time that cell division is happening, there's an opportunity for mistakes to be made when the DNA is being copied. And then there's just a tremendous amount of like breakage and wear and tear that happens inside cells just as part of their function. And most of that's repaired. Some of it's not appropriately repaired though. And so mistakes get introduced. Sometimes they fall in parts of the genome that don't matter. Sometimes those cells are kind of dead ends. But then every once in a while, they fall into a place that does matter and those cells can replicate. So that's where you've got this kind of spark for like competition where there's, as you know, like it takes variation in order for species to compete and new species to arise. So that's kind of what's happening inside you and me as we're talking right now to some degree.
So, so you say that the book is about a new understanding of health.
Yes.
So, elaborate on that if you can.
Sure. The book starts with cancer because I think we're all familiar with the idea that mutations can cause cancer, mutations that we don't inherit from our parents per se, although there are, of course, inherited risk factors for cancer. Um, but I should add that mutations can also be linked to things like Alzheimer's disease and epilepsy. It's demonstrated to be linked to epilepsy and all sorts of different diseases have an element that can be caused by acquired mutations. And I'm just going to check one thing here because I realized I might not have turned my mic on. So Do you mind if I just see if that does that change anything in terms of sound quality? Do you hear me a bit better?
Someone said there was an echo, which I don't hear, but
There's an echo now or what
I
before?
don't know. Someone in the chat said there's an echo.
Okay, I'll
I don't
continue
know.
like this, and if there's an echo, let me
Okay.
know. So in any case, so the mutations we acquire can cause sorry, yes, continue? Yeah, okay,
I
sorry.
guess.
So the mutations that we pick up in these parts of the genome that um, are important, they're just linked to so many different aspects of health. So I want people to know that when they go, for example, for a diagnosis, they might want to be asking their doctor about whether what they have could be a result of an acquired mutation. Like in the book, I have a story of a family from 13 years ago where, and it's not 13 years ago because that was the only time, it's 13 years ago because it was the first time this happened. But there was a girl born and she had a heart defect. And the doctors thought it was pretty clearly something called long QT syndrome, which is where the part of the heart wave is kind of extended in a way that it's irregular. But when they tested her parents, they didn't find a mutation for long QT, which baffled them because long QT is thought to be inherited. So this was the first case in which they found out that a baby in this case, but a person can actually have this disease called long QT syndrome because of a spontaneous mutation that happened in her case in embryonic development. So now that kind of just shakes the whole understanding of diagnosis for disease because what doctors thought was kind of a clear-cut only inherited disorder is now possibly also it's an acquired disorder. And following that case, they found like many other cases in which long QT was not inherited, but it was spontaneous. And these are known as what are called phenocopies. So these are diseases that arise spontaneously because of genetic mutations that happen after or during, after conception, during birth, or later in life, that aren't in the family already.
Yeah. Well, if you ever see a drug advertisement, a lot of the drugs they advertise say they can affect the long QT level.
Right. That's
So,
true.
yeah.
That's true.
So, in terms of cancer, knowing that our cells do mutate, what are doctors going to do with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, cancer affects all of us.
Okay.
And I mean, um, I lost a friend pretty recently to cancer. So, like, to me, this is all like relevant because we want to understand these diseases well enough that we can kind of overcome them. And uh, traditionally, cancers were seen to be the result of one or two genetic mutations. That's kind of originally decades ago how people thought about it. Then scientists were like, okay, we'll make this a little bit more sophisticated. We'll add it's maybe more than that. But in the recent years, ever since we've kind of gotten technologies like single cell sequencing, where they can sequence the DNA of a single cell, scientists have understood that cancers can have thousands of mutations. And how this is relevant medically is that there are scientists now, there are doctors, for example, at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida, which I write about, what they take patients' tumors and they actually try to pit the cancer cells against one another. So they try to give a leg up to the cancer cells that are drug sensitive, that will be knocked out by the mutation. And they try to make those cells kind of overtake the ones that are drug resistant that will not respond well to medication. Um, so that's kind of part of how there's a power in understanding the landscape of genetic mutation inside a tumor. We want to figure out, now that we know that there's so many mutations, we want to figure out which ones matter, which ones we can target, which ones are driving kind of the evolution of the tumor to become more potent or more deadly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what about heart disease, which is the number one killer
Yeah.
worldwide?
So yeah, heart disease also super relevant
Mhm.
because it affects so many people. As I said, kind of initially, this was one of my ins to this whole field of understanding how our bodies are ever mutating and how the burden of mutation can affect our health. So if you have mutations in certain blood cells, those blood cells can actually replicate faster and outcompete other cells in your body. And they've been shown to actually have a kind of inflammatory response. So they'll respond to things like cholesterol the way that they might respond normally to toxins and just cause like a cascade of inflammation. As we all know, inflammation is not a great thing to happen inside our bodies. So what was shown is that these mutations that are in these blood cells that kind of go wild, they're linked to leukemia, but not everybody that has the cells go on to have leukemia. But they're also linked to a doubled risk of heart attack, a doubled risk of stroke, even Alzheimer's, to be honest. They recently identified kind of these same mutations in cells that are in the brain growing kind of more than others. And and so there's this whole idea that like maybe the inflammation is the link between how these things are causing all these problems. But I think it's super interesting. There's also the doctors looking into this have found gene targets in this whole pathway that they want to go after in order to shake up the balance and kind of drive down these mutant cells. And as I'm talking about this, it sounds kind of super scientific, but I want to emphasize that this is really common. So around 10 to 20% of people in their 70s have a threshold level of these mutant blood cells in their body. So we're talking about something that maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 people over a certain age, they're walking around with a significant number of these mutant cells. So it's not just like a pie in the sky, or that's not the right phrase to use. It's not just a theoretical thing that is important. It is important because it's so common.
Yeah, I know. I mean, now I was at the American Heart Association annual meeting
Oh, wow.
in New Orleans. It's kind of, and you're talking about inflammation. We also talk about how things have been overlooked. Like, I think there's almost too much emphasis on just measuring your LDL, with like
Right, right,
inflammation and
right.
testing the alpha lipoprotein, which
Yes,
they offer
absolutely.
testing there. And I said, we're not, you never tested me for it, ever. And they said, well, we're just starting to get in a little vogue now, but they're still, and
There are
I
people
think,
that say we should test for these mutant cells. Why are we not
yes.
testing for these mutant cells? So I think it's a good question. I mean, I will say that when there's all these new centers that are being started at hospitals to
Mhm.
help patients that are diagnosed with these mutant cells because there's a little bit of a waiting game. Like, okay, am I gonna get cancer now? Am I gonna get heart disease? Like, because your risk is so much higher. I think they really try to help those individuals make lifestyle changes that can reverse some of that risk. So it's interesting times for sure.
So if everyone over 70 is walking around with mutations, how do you just go around living your life?
One thing that I found startling, again, because there's many layers, and a lot of the science is so new, which is another reason I really wanted to write the book because it wasn't kind of, I wasn't looking at other books as I was writing this so much as I was looking at just like research papers that are coming out. Um, and one of the ones that recently came out before the book was put to press was showing that sleep actually can mitigate the rise of these mutant cells in your body. So as somebody like myself who likes to write and stay up working really late, that was a message to myself that I should sleep a bit more, prioritize that. And of course, there are pharmacological, or how should I say this? There's drug targets that are suggested either to, as I was saying, kind of like bring down those mutant cells in the body, or we could talk about some of the beneficial mutations that happen in the body and how scientists are looking at those as inspiration for new drugs as well. So there's kind of good mutation in the body and bad mutation. We've been talking about the bad mutation, but I was really surprised to find so much good mutation happening in our bodies as well.
There's artificial intelligence, which is being used in medicine more often. Does that have any role to play here in sync with, in looking at mutations and looking at
I mean, I think it does because, like,
gathering data?
so David, like, as I started this book, AI was not as big a thing, but over the course of the years of reporting it, it did become bigger. And one thing I really came to appreciate is we've kind of gone very, very quickly from not knowing how much genetic diversity is in a human body to understanding that there's so much we can't, how do we make sense of this noise, right? Like, how do we figure it out? So, like, there is now so much granularity in our understanding of mutation that they can actually look at a person's DNA mutations and say whether they've been whether they've been smoking tobacco or chewing tobacco, because those have different signatures in all this noise of mutation that are distinct from one another, which I found super cool because it just shows you how much granularity we're getting in terms of this. Um, but I do think that AI will probably have a role just in crunching all of this data and mapping between diseases and all the mutations that are found throughout the genome. So I think that it will be helpful. Just like the sequencing is kind of coming up, so is the data crunching. Does that make
So if you
sense?
have, if, so for the people listening, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll read them. So your has gotten a lot of praise. There was an article in the New Yorker about it. The book
Mhm.
review was like 5 pages and by
It was
Jerome
longer than
Liebman.
yeah, it was long.
And you were on, I saw an interview with you with Eric Topol
Yes. Yeah.
and also on Science Friday.
Yeah.
I know Eric.
But this is what the moment I've been waiting for is to talk to you. So
I, I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Most people tell me that. So I went to high school with Eric.
it's
So
amazing.
yeah. Um, so I'll wait for some questions. What was the biggest surprise for you when writing this book? And how long did it take you to write it?
Oh yeah. So I just did a timeline for a talk I'm doing later this week to kind of conceptualize that. And I actually found out that I connected. So I had the idea back in 2018. Obviously, 2019, I moved to Canada. Things were kind of, I was researching kind of in the time I could, but I was making this big life move. And then COVID happened in 2020, and I was just swept up in reporting that. You and I talked when I wrote in that article about how it was
Yes.
airborne, and that got a lot of attention. So I kind of kept on with that. But I looked back and my agent for this book, we connected in 2020, in the summer of 2020. So that's already almost 6 years ago. I worked with him and we got the proposal done by late 2021. So I had the proposal accepted by a publisher late 2021, signed an agreement, a contract with them back then. Then I had a baby like half a year later. So
Perfect
got kind of
timing.
yeah, perfect time and kind of got swept up in that. But when he was around 4 months old, I started cracking on getting into the book writing. So it took me about 3 years to kind of write, fact check, all that stuff. And I was writing articles a little bit on the side too. So kind of multitasking. Um, but I really, in the course of writing the book, I didn't want to just kind of throw a bunch of scientific anecdotes together. I wanted the structure to feel like it was going somewhere, like it was kind of a journey. And and so I spent a lot of time reworking the structure. That's part of the reason it took so long. But in the course of that, to answer the question of like the things that surprised me, I think it's kind of a two-part answer because I want to talk about the surprises of how good mutation is for us. So I was surprised in part by how necessary mutation is for having strong immunity and how vaccines and getting sick to some degree um, kind of precipitate a chain of events that cause our immune cells to mutate for the better, to be better immune cells, to make better antibodies. And then the other part, second part of the goodness of mutation that surprised me was just finding out that there were patients with things like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, um, ADA SCID, which is kind of an immune disorder, but it used to be called bubble boy disease, which I don't really like that name for it. But that these patients would acquire mutations spontaneously that correct their inherited mutation and improve their clinical outcomes. Like, and that also happens in most people when they get fatty liver disease, their livers actually just get mutations that help them deal with excess calories better. So, just seeing the upside of mutation was really surprising in a good way.
Right, so I have two questions. Please feel free to the audience to put in more. Could you give us some examples, I guess, of mutations that have a beneficial impact on our health?
Yeah, so I was just talking about
Yeah, you just talked about
the ones, but like there's also an example of this disease called Fanconi anemia. And so Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which I was referring to, is a disease where your muscles deteriorate over time, amongst other things, and you lose function and have a very premature death because your heart and your lungs all need muscle function in order to operate. And when kind of these revertant or rescuing mutations, these autocorrections happen in the body, it's hard for them to fully overcome the disorder because muscles are kind of fixed in space. So they're not like replicating and winning out over other like mus muscle cells with the bad mutation. But in diseases of the immune system or blood cells, like this form of anemia I was referring to, that's quite serious. When good cells arise, they can actually move around and they can actually cure a person of the disorder. So around 5% of people with Fanconi anemia, it's estimated, have the stem cells necessary, the corrected stem cells that have spontaneously self-corrected in order to cure themselves of the disorder. And the idea is, okay, in all these examples where good mutations have shown a benefit, can we replicate that somehow, I don't know, with gene therapy or some other way, some drug delivery type of thing, in order to give the patients where it hasn't spontaneously occurred the same benefit. So it's like almost I've heard it been called natural gene therapy when it happens spontaneously.
Okay. There's an article in Nature last month about recent last 10,000 years human evolution, which included things like blood types that are more disease resistant.
Hmm.
Could you comment on this with regard to developments in the immune system?
I mean, the immune system is endlessly fascinating. I think having reported on COVID and seen the intricacies, I mean, you might feel the same way. We were all terrified of the immune system, and then 2020 came, and we're like, well, we have no luxury of being terrified anymore. So I do think that that Nature paper, which I've heard about but I haven't read very closely, it does suggest that this is an area like the immune system has just got to adapt because the environment around us is so profoundly changing all the time. There's new pathogens coming up out of nowhere, as we've seen. My book focuses much more on the individual. It's kind of like it's almost the antithesis to the idea of species evolution. Antithesis is maybe a strong word, but it's looking really just at what happens from conception until our last breath. So I can only say that it makes sense to me that the immune system has been rapidly evolving just because it happens so much on an individual scale. Our immune systems are just in constant genetic flux. And the idea is almost one of the things I write about in the book is that even when your body does come up with a good antibody, and it does so by kind of reshuffling its genetic code, kind of like you pull the slot machine at Vegas, it kind of just like shakes things up a bit. But when it does find a good antibody, it even has a feedback mechanism in order to stop making just that one antibody and to diversify more. So I like to say a good immune system is a strong immune system is a diversified one.
Okay. So, like everybody else, we're being told about how dangerous microplastics are.
Yeah,
I mean, from both the Make America Healthy Again to
sure.
traditional scientists. And does that play any role in mutation of cells?
There's nothing about microplastics per se in the book, but I do think that it does speak to this idea of, okay, could we potentially now look at the cells of somebody's gut who ingests a lot of microplastics and find a mutational signature, kind of the way that people did with tobacco? I think because we have these tools now where we can do the individual sequencing of individual cells, I do think that I would not be surprised if there's a paper that looks at exactly that in the next 5 years.
I'll go on. Can the study of mutations you describe in your book be advanced by conducting experiments on animals?
I mean, there are some example. There's animal experiments in the book, everything from flies to mice. So, in the flies, for example, or in the 60s and 70s. So again, this idea that this concept of competition in the body has kind of come up through the decades. They were able to show that certain cells were like really like beating out other cells within the fly, like if they're mutant cells, they call them winner or loser cells. And there are studies in mice, for example, for there are some therapies that are being explored for metabolic disorders like PKU, which is where you can't properly um, metabolize a certain amino acid. They're actually kind of doing these mice experiments to kind of show how you could give cells a leg up in the liver that make the proper enzymes to overcome this genetic disorder. So I think that, and also I should say that there's a really interesting research in the last chapter about aging, where scientists in the UK basically did this like Noah's Ark experiment, and they looked at the cells from all like giraffes, horses or zebras, a certain kind of monkey that kind of looks like Elvis because it's got this like hair or something like hanging off like white and black, kind of like the Elvis suit when he performs in Vegas. Uh, so so they looked at all these different animals. They looked at the intestinal cells, these things called crypts, where they're kind of little pockets in the intestines because they can calculate mutational rates looking at those. And they found that all these species had a mutation rate where they ended up with about 3,200 mutations at the end of their lifespan in those intestinal cells. And it didn't matter how long or short the lifespan of the species was. So humans and mice and um, giraffes were all kind of ending up with the same number of mutations. It's just that certain species kind of seem to have a faster mutational rate, and those ones seem to die sooner. So the idea is, does slowing mutation potentially improve longevity? And there's evidence from bowhead whales, which are the longest lived species, that that in fact is the case.
Well, the next question is the rejuvenation of aging bone marrow and reinfusing the rejuvenated cells has been shown to reverse somatic and cognitive signs of aging. Are you familiar with these findings, and what do you think is going on?
It's hard not to have a conversation with that person because I don't know exactly what papers they're referring to or what rejuvenation
Right.
in particular. I will say that there are companies that are trying to draw on the insight that so bowhead whales, when they looked at the cells of bowhead whales, they had many, many, many fold more of certain DNA repair enzymes. So, and also centenarians, folks who live to be like 100 or more, have certain signatures of DNA repair, or certain variants of DNA repair enzymes as well. So the idea is, can we mimic some of that and improve longevity through kind of improving DNA repair in cells? I don't know if you'd call that rejuvenation or just like improve DNA repair. But again, it goes back to this idea that we're all mutating. Um, does this mutation that accumulates inside us over the course of our life cause some kind of disarray, some disorder, some noise that then causes things like frailty or just like degeneration of tissues and things like that?
I know that the researchers at Albert Einstein are looking at aging and studying centenarians
Centenarians, yeah.
who don't eat. They don't eat any healthier than anybody else.
Right.
They go to delis and get pastrami sandwiches.
Yum.
Um,
I
they're,
had a
they're not
pastrami sandwich. I was just in New York. I had a pastrami sandwich. Got to have one
they're
of
not
those.
yeah, they're not vegans, and the one thing they also the one thing they do have is that they seem to be able to clear toxins more efficiently than most people.
Well, I think part
And
of, oh, sorry. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I was just going to
I,
say one of the things that you asked me at the very beginning, like, why did I write this book? And I
yeah,
think that as somebody who has talked a lot with families who have been profoundly affected by genetic disease, I felt like the gap between people who are kind of affected profoundly by an inherited disorder, genetic disorder, and maybe people that are born without any apparent mutation that affects their health. I think it's much narrower than people think. I think we're all mutants, essentially, is what I'm arguing here. And um, and I kind of want to embrace a little bit of this unknown, like what you're talking about, people that live really long that don't eat so great. Is it because they have a slower mutational rate? Like, is there something we haven't yet considered? Is mutation kind of the missing piece to aging? Is something I really feel is worth exploring.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, they also, don't exercise. They're not crazy. I mean, I've been watching on CNN Kara Swisher's
Oh
show,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and basically she doesn't want, I forget, she wants to live forever. And she interviewed one person who he devotes his entire life to measuring everything,
Yes,
injecting himself with
yes.
everything. He's a multi-billionaire, and I'm thinking he doesn't seem happy at all.
I want people to just embrace the mess. There's a lot of mutation happening inside us. We cannot control all the things.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it's important Eric Topol, who you'd mentioned earlier, he talks about like our health span to live healthy. So I think it's important
right.
to
Yeah.
just focus on that too, just making sure that the years we have are healthy. Obviously, I'm not advocating people eat a pastrami sandwich every day, which is a delicious idea, but the more balanced because I think like you're alluding to, there's people that kind of take it to extremes, and it seems to me like they're trying to seize control. And what I'm trying to say is, yeah, you can kind of control things a bit, but there's a lot of spontaneity in our bodies that you cannot control.
They're measuring everything, like how long they sleep, what are they
Yeah,
doing,
yeah,
what they're drinking, and
yeah,
I think there's this illusion that if you're measuring everything, you know exactly what's going on,
right.
then you're ahead of the game, and
But we'll
it's
never
not.
know until the day when
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
sequence the DNA in every cell of our body, which we can't do because then we'd have to kind of toast every single cell in our body to figure that out. So we gotta live with the unknown, embrace
yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, and I have read a lot about the healthy span and the age span,
Yes.
and you don't want to you don't want to be on a respirator in a wheelchair the last 20 years of
No,
your life.
no,
So,
no, you
but
don't.
and there's also luck, you know, and genetics.
You're right, right, yeah. But yeah, so there is this like, kind of theory that some people mutate slower than others, and that could be kind of so again, like this idea of once we figure out what's helping some people, can we then replicate it to help those of us that might not have that?
Well, someone put in the chat the article, although I can't click on it. So anyways, so what's the reception of the book then?
I've been so
Seems great.
pleased to
It
s-
seems
I've been
great.
I've been pleased to see, just at a very personal level, like my friends they've known me as a science journalist for 20 years, and they've known I've written about things that I'm really like impassioned about. They haven't always come along for the ride, the genetics ride, but this is really I'm getting a really good response just from people I know personally that are saying, I had a family member affected by this, or I am affected by this, and I finally feel like I have some understanding of what's happening in me. I've had friends with cancer tell me that. That's been the most rewarding kind of feedback I've gotten, beyond the kind of more, I guess, public um, response that's been good. So just to see people connect with this topic that I'm so I really think everybody needs to know this stuff. I really think in order to be a patient in 2026 and feel empowered in the health system, like you kind of just have to know that mutation has a role in disease. It's just important to know, I think.
No, what did you learn from writing this book that you will carry on with your
In terms of the writing
the
process
no,
or the facts.
no what did you learn from writing this book that you will carry on to your next book,
Oh, to my next book. Ooh, if there's a next book.
if there's a next book?
If there's a next, I hope there's a next book. I mean, I can talk about the process-oriented things, which is like, I think when you're writing a book, you have a little bit more leeway to kind of let loose and just research the heck out of something. And I would go on some pretty far, like I would dig some pretty deep holes in PubMed, or on like research platforms. So I think I knew I was going a little too far when I got this book called Die Schwarze Urine or something like the black urine. It's a German, and it was
Mhm.
like referencing a Latin text. So I was kind of going a couple layers deep already. And this Latin text was from like, 600 years ago or so, I forget, about a guy who had black urine. So, and it was about, because I wrote a lot about this disorder called PNH, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria.
That's in the book where it got
That part's in the book.
and also different color here.
Yeah, you have well, so it's kind of, sorry, I said black, but it's kind of dark red. It's like kind of wine red.
Right,
So
right. Yeah.
different people will describe it as different colors. But I think what I'll learn for the next book is just not to go on so many deep historical dives because I got really obsessed with kind of understanding like who was first diagnosed with these kind of obscure, not not totally obscure, but just like unusual disorders. So I think in my next book, I'll be much more diligent to like stay focused and not go too far into the history of these things when not necessary. Although I will say, maybe the upside is I will definitely try to see how far back ideas go because I think I was just so surprised at the fact that this idea of mutation or genetic diversity or just simply diversity in the human body is so not novel and yet novel at the same time. So kind of understanding the tension between what we did know and now what we're discovering was a really good place to be.
So do you think that kind of resurrected the Dr. Rue's
I hope so.
place in
I hope so.
science?
And I
Yeah.
love that you're asking about it because I
Yeah.
feel it's I really hope that, I was speaking with the people that manages archives in Germany, and I think they were kind of like, "Who are you? Like, why are you asking about this?" And I still need to get back in touch with them and show them the book and be like, "Hey, this is
Mm.
why I'm reaching out to you."
Well, it's kind of nice to find someone who, was thinking about all this and is not really known, and he's kind of a hero.
Yeah, he's a
So,
hero. Although he's a bit of an anti-hero because he seemed a little bit grumpy and like
yeah. Mm.
maybe a little self-promotional at the same time. It's hard to know, but maybe he just like really wanted people to maybe he foresaw that he would be forgotten for a while, so he was trying to push the limits of getting known. But yeah, he would
Yeah,
take these walks, and he didn't like to travel that much, so he'd just take these walks in the rain at like 7 a.m. and drink his coffee. He would describe himself as a lonely guy when he was younger, so probably wasn't doing himself
well,
favors.
you read about Darwin and oh, a guy loves nature. He didn't like it that much. He talks
He was
about
not so well all the time.
he's not well, it was cold in the boat, he
Yeah,
complained about that and
yeah,
all these things.
yeah.
And so I remember a friend of mine told me about Gauguin, and so, he said he didn't think it was ideal. He wrote about how he hated the people, didn't like them. So
Yeah, the characters are great.
and the characters are great, yeah. And which makes them, I mean, that's to me is how I when I read a book, if I read it, I like reading about the characters.
Yeah, yeah.
It helps you understand
It,
the science.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I feel grateful that the patients spoke with me for this book. They were really generous with their time, and it's been really nice to now share it with them and say this is kind of how it all ties together.
so it's very readable, but there's a lot of complex science in this. So who was your ideal audience, if you have one?
So my hairdresser looked at this book. I guess there's a copy right there, and he was
Okay.
like, "This looks like a party invitation." And I think it is a party. It is. I tried to host a party because I had been researching this and I was noticing that even the scientists within this space, so like the main character of one chapter, for example, doesn't know about all the science happening in the other one. So I have three ideal audiences. One is the scientists that are deep, deep, deep into understanding acquired mutations that just don't know that like this stuff is going on in aging because they're looking at the heart or they're studying cancer or they didn't know about Wilhelm Roux, like just to understand the history of their field, which is obviously niche. Then I wanted doctors to read this book because I think that, there's mysterious illnesses in this book that are described that are then solved by the insight that, oh, this person has a spontaneous mutation causing this. So, doctors to understand this, and especially there's stuff about fertility as well in this book.
Mm.
So I think if they read that and their kind of eyes are open to that, um, And then also you and I guess, yeah, I was gonna say you and me, but I've obviously written the book, so I couldn't be my own audience, but just people that are interested in science and health that want to feel like when they go into their doctor's office, they kind of just understand what causes disease and why people get sick better. I know that's not a super satisfying answer because it's not like one audience, but like you say, like I kind of try to distill complex ideas into stories. And there's references at the back of the book. If somebody wants to go and find out the paper, they can do that. But the idea is that the science is super new, but the stories are stories.
So, there's a lot of complaints about, you go to a doctor, you're there maybe 10 minutes,
Yeah.
they're taking notes, you don't see them.
Yes.
You see, I mean, if you bring up mutation, they say, I got to measure your cholesterol and your blood sugar.
Right.
And so I'm glad that if doctors read this, maybe that,
Yeah.
when they have more complicated cases, they might think out of the box a little bit.
Yeah. And there's a story at the last chapter of Michael Prescott who had this he had something like 4 or 5 heart attacks in one year, and his kid was like super young. His kid was a toddler. Michael was in his 30s, and then he needed a transplant. Like he was getting really sick, and he had cataracts. His hair was turning white. Doctors could not figure out what was going on with him. And he sat down and just read research papers at night and came back to them with a diagnosis and was like, hey guys, could it be this? And they were like, hey, that's actually a really good idea. Let's test you for it. And it turned out that he was right. It was Werner syndrome, which is this disease of rapid aging. And so I feel like it's very possible for people to I mean, you can't do a genetic test on yourself, but you can think outside the box. And hopefully this will help people do that.
Can't you order genetic tests? I think you can order some genetic tests.
Yes, I'm sorry, you can order some genetic tests, but
Mm,
not all of them.
Not all of them, I agree. So I don't see any new questions. So where can people get the book?
So they can get it pretty much anywhere. Like I support independent bookstores, so I was just at McNally Jackson. They have it's in New York. They have a bunch. I'm doing an
Okay.
event at Distill. So basically I think everywhere they can get it. It's also I recorded the audiobook, so we could talk a little bit
Uh,
about what that was like if you want. Hopefully I know I have an echo in here, but hopefully it's less in the recording of the audiobook, you go to a studio and they have a very professional setup, so.
we try. We got a grant from NASW for microphones and cameras. Um,
No, I was speaking more about my setup. Yours
oh,
sounds
you're
great,
set.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to do an audio? You
So
read the whole
it
book?
was about 4 days of going to the studio, kind of like full work day,
Mhm.
and a lot of tea, like herbal teas. I think I was also drinking some matcha to like stay peppy.
Okay.
And I learned actually a lot as a writer about my writing through the course of recording the audiobook. What I liked, of course, as a writer, you're always like, what if I rewrote that? So it was a good experience, and I really wanted my voice to be on the audiobook because I feel when I listen to nonfiction and it's from the author, there's a certain connection that you feel. I mean, I don't know if I should share this or not, but there's a part in the book that I get very emotional about when I talk about in depth. It is related to that case I was talking about with the child who had the heart defect and what her parents go through when seems to be doing fine, and then they're called to the hospital, and she has a huge operation, and they see all this blood on the floor as they're sitting across the hall, and she's put on an artificial heart for a while. She's fine now. Um, but in the course of reading that in the audiobook recording, I was struck by how emotional I was telling the story of this family because it's the stakes are so high, you know.
Well, I just want to say, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate it. You were great. Also, thank you for the audience who tuned in and for their very intelligent questions. The next person I'm going to interview is Seth Mnookin on June 3rd. His book just came out in paperback, and it, it's on vaccines and hesitancy and all that. So we'll be sending out announcements. So thank you, Roxanne, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Having talking to you during the pandemic was I really enjoyed talking to you during the pandemic immensely. So this feels kind of full circle for me to come back and talk to
Yeah,
you
yeah,
again, and maybe
I
we'll talk again
appreciate
in
it.
a few years.
Yeah, yes, anytime. And and good luck. And we'll be talking. Oh, I'm going to we're recording this. It'll be on YouTube, and feel free to send it to anyone you want.
Thanks. And people, I hope people enjoy the book. They can like send me a message and let me know. But thank you.
The book is very readable. It's got full of interesting characters. The science is, it, great. It's, you gotta really read it. It's
Thank you.
it's but all right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna end this and take care. Happy May 5th.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Bye now.